Good evening, everyone, and welcome to tonight's SAMAG seminar at the Australia Council for the Arts. My name is Sophia Kuyum-Jan, and I am a committee member of SAMAG and also the director at Parramatta Artist Studios, so welcome. To begin tonight's proceedings, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we gather, the Gadigal of the Eora Nation, and pay respect to elders past and present. So tonight's seminar is called Building Culture, and we have a fantastic lineup of speakers here just for you. Gina Fairley is our fantastic moderator for this evening, and she will take you through a brief introduction of everyone. But just to begin with, welcome to Gina, to Russell Briggs from the Australian Museum, to Karen Ford from Mama in Albury, and Rosie Dennis from Urban Theatre Projects. So we'll kick off the discussion very shortly, but before we do, you probably already noticed that there was a little discussion going on up the back. So tonight we have some representatives from the City of Sydney, who actually are fantastic supporters of SAMAG, and the City of Sydney are currently in the midst of developing a draft cultural infrastructure discussion paper. And of course they want everyone's input, including yours. So tonight is your opportunity to, or one of the opportunities you will get, to contribute to that discussion paper. And you would have seen the small piece of paper on your chair. If you haven't already, please take a moment to respond to the question on that piece of paper, which says how can we better manage existing cultural spaces or build new cultural spaces across Sydney. So it's very much about how we're connecting creative activity and spaces across the City of Sydney. So make sure to get involved in that discussion. So, without further ado, I'd like to hand over to Gina to carry on with the seminar. Thanks, Gina.
Thanks, Sophia. So that's a very small piece of paper for a very, very big question.
I can write on both sides.
A warm thanks for you all, to you all for coming out tonight. It's a bit steamy out there today. I also wanted to take this moment to thank the SAMAG committee for the work that they do, and as someone who observes the sector regularly, I feel that they're doing a really important job in, hosting these conversations. So, and I don't think they get enough praise for that. So I just want us all to have a little thank you to SAMAG. So building cultures. I find this a really interesting topic as we turn to acknowledge First Nation elders. Tonight we're on Gadigal land. Many of us were born on Gadigal land, and we're all just passing through this incredible place, the Eora Nation. While we've become much better at giving a nod of respect, we still have a lot to learn in how to listen to our elders better. And as we consider this topic, building culture, building structures upon this land and sharing the culture that makes this place unique, I ask us to keep in mind our footprint and our impact with respect to First Nation elders, past and present. So in terms of our bios, I'm going to run through, but if we can hold our little sort of rah-rah towards the end, just to keep it brief. Russell Briggs, here to my left, has just a wee job. He oversees the permanent, temporary and touring exhibitions at the Australian Museum, as well as its public and education programs, its digital engagement, museum, archives and library, not to mention keeping an eye on its collection of over 18 million objects. He joined the museum in September last year and comes to Sydney after 5 years at the Auckland Museum and 5 years at ACME in Melbourne, the Australia Centre for Moving Image. At the Australian Museum, he helped steer the organisation through a $70 million capital improvement project, which sustainably grew in attendance for that organisation, and we're going to dig a little bit deeper into the wins and the challenges of that. And Russell is currently involved in the Barabawari, is that correct? Barabawari Maru Master Plan, which was launched in 2016 for the Australian Museum. It's well in excess of $250 plus million redevelopment, and I'm going to dig into the reality of that and how it is rolling out. Russell's a native of Los Angeles and studied film at UCLA, and naturally worked in Hollywood for a number of years, which eventually led to a role with Warner New Media. And the reason I bring that up is because of that massive term engagement and how development taps into that whole package of engagement. And we use it so freely today, but I'm curious to know how that intersection of engagement and building culture comes together. So, Rosie Dennis, way over there, is Artistic Director of Urban Theatre Projects in Blacktown and various other locations, quite dynamic. And it's a position she's held for 6 years. Prior to that, Rosie was the inaugural Live Art Curator. Don't you love that title, Live Art Curator? At Campbelltown Art Museum for 2 years, and also spent a couple of years with Performance Space. And like many of us working in cultural organisations, Rosie has what we fashionably term portfolio career. She's a writer, a director, a performer, and a champion of bold, innovative works that push the boundaries between platforms. Since joining Urban Theatre Projects, she's had an absolute swag of fantastic projects. Many of them have been associated with Sydney Festival. I won't run through all of them, but quite impressive. So, and last year, Rosie was selected as one of 7 recipients of the inaugural New South Wales, Create New South Wales, Virtual Reality Development Initiative for the Arts. So, I'm curious to hear how VR fits into building culture. And as an independent organisation working across locations and communities, I think she's going to offer a refreshing alternate voice to the big muscle institution here. So thanks, Rosie. Karen Ford is a dynamo, I've decided. She comes to us today from Murray Art Museum in Albury, affectionately known as MAMA. And she's worked in various capacities around and within that organisation. How did it all start? It started in the finance department with the Albury City Council. And she helped steer the redevelopment of the then Albury Regional Art Gallery through its planning, construction, completion and rebrand as MAMA. She then moved into the creative business and operation role, and is now acting director of the organisation. Straddling the New South Wales border, Albury then was a very small regional gallery, and it underwent a $10 million refurbishment in 2015 and quickly became the talk of the state, and I'd say the nation, as a model for how to build culture and transform a small regional town. The gallery is entering yet another era as it's matured into that new skin, and it's setting up a MAMA advisory committee that's embedded within the council, which I find a really interesting next phase. And I'm looking forward to hear from her how an organisation settles into its new physical asset and then finds the energy to continue that momentum to keep it growing. So let's welcome our fine folk. My first question is a bit of a pop quiz one. I just want to know who in the audience has been through a major building redevelopment or a refit? Oh, okay, about a third. And who in the audience are considering this as their next stage, that it's necessary for your growth and you're hungry for knowledge? About another third. Okie dokie. So we appear at the moment to be in a kind of spinning dervish of development within the culture sector, as galleries, museums and theatres from our capital cities and our state cultural institutions to independents and regional galleries. And theatres are at various stages of pitching, planning, developing and delivering buildings. In this city alone, we have Walsh Bay Precinct, we have Sydney Modern, we had the incredibly controversial powerhouse move to Parramatta, We have the development of Riverside Theatre, and of course the 190th birthday of the Australian Museum has been an incredible catalyst to bring it into the 21st century. In Canberra, the National Portrait Gallery, the National Gallery of Australia are both about to commence major multi-million-dollar refurbishment works, and we can't ignore last week's news of the Australian War Memorial's $500 million redevelopment. We have Adelaide Contemporary, which has just gone through its international architecture competition, but then it's had the rug pulled with a change of government in September and a change of direction what that museum will be. And in Melbourne, the NGV recently announced that it was going to build the largest art museum in Australia. And La Mama today has announced a $1 million donation from Vic government to rebuild its devastating fire that just happened recently. In regional Australia, we've got examples like Lismore, we've got Shepparton Art Gallery, we've got Bendigo Art Gallery. It's massive, it just goes on and on and on. We're on a building frenzy. So my question is, what the hell is going on? Have our institutions got to the point where the band-aid on wear and tear from a prolonged lack of capital development no longer works? Is it a reflection of a more experienced, demanding, diverse audience? And that means simply we've outgrown our skins of bricks and mortar? Or is there another agenda driving this? A massive injection into our cultural infrastructure, one called elections and politicians. And then how as we as cultural producers and custodians of culture, how do we know when it's the right time to take that next step? So I want to start with you, Karen. Mama's like the golden example in many ways of doing it right at a scale that was right for you, and it was probably a scale that's more realistic to a lot of us in the room. Firstly, do you think you did it right from the beginning? And how do you embark on that process? You know, what was the first great challenge to getting it up?
Well, the challenge was actually really quite a long process. It was originally conceptually identified back in 2001 that there was a redevelopment was required. We went through a lot of community engagement during that time. After 2001, we then went to 2003, in which we had 3 major public community engagement processes, in which it was identified that a redevelopment of the art gallery was required. It then went from there to further community engagement when we redeveloped the library museum within our cultural precinct. We have an overarching cultural precinct management plan as part of Albury City Council. We have if anyone's not familiar with Albury City, we have a large green square right in the centre of town that we want to activate and engage audiences to use from a cultural but also just an everyday use perspective. As part of that library museum redevelopment, we had to identify whether or not the redevelopment of Butler fit within what was actually Albury Regional Art Gallery at that time, had to fit within that structure. And it was identified then that the community had a big, massive need to redevelop it. So from there, as plans progressed, we continued the redevelopment. We put through planning submissions for to state and federal funding. We put in, I think, $3.5 million federal funding, which we were successful in. We put in $3.5 million for New South Wales state funding as well. The funding for New South Wales state wasn't successful, which was a big, massive clink in the chain, which actually held up the progress and the process of how we were actually going to implement the museum. With the new coming, with being a council-run institution as well, we had that added complexity of council overseeing and determining whether or not we could go ahead with that, not having that $3.5 million in place. We put together, with the help of the previous cultural services group leader, she put together and banded together to develop and get a petition that we could actually submit to council and to the New South Wales Legislative Assembly with over 5,000 signatures on it to say that we actually wanted this museum to go ahead, which was pretty labour intensive for us and the staff at Mama, but it was actually pretty amazing to know that the community was that we could get 5,000 signatures. So we had to put together, after that proposal and when the New South Wales government still refused any additional support, we went back to council with 3 different options as to how we were going to fund the museum. One was that we just continue business as usual, which, we can't do, and the council contribute and pay for the whole lot. Another one was that we try and seek alternative funding elsewhere, and another one was that we would try and raise $1.05 million in philanthropic funds.
Was that the breakthrough moment?
It was.
Yeah.
So the moment that we agreed, and the council agreed to allow us to raise that money, was the moment that we could actually really start getting the business, the building and the plans and the architectural designs and drawings underway, which was amazing. The process of how it all rolled out and all the structure and governance structures surrounding it, and all the budgeting and everything was all fairly smooth, I guess, as it goes along. There were as always with a project of that size, there's always a few hiccups and a few things that probably could be better conceived. One being, when you're limited with the price level that you have to construct that building within, you're also limited to the quality of the build and that as well, which can impact on future operational costs and things which we're still trying to iron out some of those differences at the moment.
So do you think that's the zone where most of the archaeology goes on?
It is during that construction phase. You put an item out for tender, you get quotes back, and you get varying amounts. But the ones generally the cheapest are always the ones that are going to put massive variations in, which end up throwing your budget drastically out of the ballpark.
Doesn't sound like building at all.
There was also some other issues that would come along, we ended up finding that it was actually quite a historical site, and there were a lot of artefacts uncovered in there, which we didn't actually budget for uncovering it and putting all the archaeological things aside with it as well. So we didn't budget for a lot of the remedial roof works that we had to do because of birds nesting in a roof and floorboards not working. But apart from those types of things, everything else sort of went fairly to plan. I think it was because of the governance structures and things that we'd put in place. We'd had an actual governance working party, we had a construction design committee working party, and we also had an education working party and engagement community and audience engagement working party moving forward as well.
Right. So what you're sort of tapping on, which is what I want to direct to Russell now, is that whole idea of master planning, and how tight and how loose do we need to be in that master planning stage? You came to the museum as that Barabawari. Yes, I was with language. It was already in play, basically. So has there been a need to recalibrate that plan in the process as you go along? And do you need to really be flexible when you're mounting these big projects? They tend to get bogged down a little bit in balance sheets and governments. So how do you actually stay agile to deliver what you need to deliver?
Yeah, that's about 10 questions. So the original vision, which predates my arrival at Australia Museum, I've been there for 15 months, was and is quite a grand vision, and is in the hundreds of millions of dollars, which we've not gotten from the government yet, hopefully someday. And I have a director who's very, very visionary and quite persistent about raising money. And So in terms of the flexibility, she realized at a certain point that the ask that we had originally conceived, which was in the neighborhood of $300 million, was too much for what the government in New South Wales would be able to bear at that time, given other commitments that they already made, like Sydney Modern, and move Powerhouse as well, which was on the cards at that time but hadn't been funded yet. So an opportunity came to split the master plan into phases, and Kim went for the first phase of funding, which was around creating an exhibition space in the center of Sydney, well, in the eastern center of Sydney, that was large enough to accommodate big touring exhibitions to come into the city, the likes of which could not have been taken by Sydney before, and were by and large going to Melbourne Museum. And so there was an impetus for the government to want to create a space that was, it was a very sexy vision to create a space where those kind of exhibitions could come into this city instead of being lost to Victoria. So the first phase of work is based around creating a 1,500 square meter, very flexible exhibition space for our own exhibitions and for touring exhibitions, and then a lot of other amenities that go with welcoming double the amount of visitors into the building, and a greatly enhanced educational space for school children. And the educational offer is another thing that the government was quite attracted to in terms of raising the funding. So the master plan that had been developed in a very loose way for the big concept had to be put aside, basically, and a new master plan had to be developed for a $57 million project, $7 million of which have to be raised by us. So it's a $50.5 million ask to the government, which they've said yes to. And that had to be just recently, yeah. So that had to be completely redeveloped, and it was a brand new master plan from the get-go. Yep. With all the work over 6 months that had to happen. And we're right now we've put in the submission for the SSDA, the State Significant Design application. We have about 30 more days to finish the design, and then it's locked, and then if it gets awarded, then we go to construction after that. And we're just about to announce our architects, so we're very busy next 30 days.
Wow, that's awesome. So a wee talk just adds to it. And we're largely talking about a new building which will be sited on that corner behind. No,
that's all phase 2.
That's phase 2.
So there's no new building going on.
So this is the Tutankhamun.
The Tutankhamun exhibition. Okay. So it's all redevelopment within the existing.
Okie doke. So you've just totally answered my next question, which is how long is a master plan relevant? So as long as it needs to be, I suppose. It's like a piece of string. The other area I wanted to touch on was timing and support. You know, how do we actually frame this out so it is real, that we can follow it? And, you know, where do we actually turn for support? So my question to any of you on the panel is, what is your advice for asking that important question, when? When is the right time to do this? What do you have to ask yourself as an organisation?
When the community needs there, when the community is actually requesting it, and, you know, when you run your community satisfaction surveys and they're suggesting that, you know, our cultural infrastructure isn't up to standard, and the accessibility of the current buildings aren't meeting needs. Where our previous gallery didn't have a lift in it, so and it had uneven floor levels. It had rising damp. There was so many things. So it's comes back to when the community from a council-run institution, when the community is actually asking for it.
Yeah, and I suppose you've touched on that there's a certain responsibility with that custodial role too. How about you, Rosie? Have you ever asked when?
Yeah, I ask when all the time.
Yeah.
and the answer changes all the time as well. So we're an independent arts organisation in Western Sydney between Blacktown and Bankstown, and we're definitely trying to grow and become a bigger arts organisation in Western Sydney. And we currently don't have a lease at one of our venues, so we're going month to month. And we just found out a month ago that in June next year we'll apply to stay in that building. But we've been looking for a different home for now. It's been the subject of our strategic planning days since I've been with the organisation.
Right, 6 years, yep.
Yep, and we had a recent strategic planning day 2 weeks ago where we've been in conversation with the state government for more than 2 years about trying to do more in Western Sydney. I was mentioning to the panel earlier, I've been told routinely by multiple members of the state government that we don't ask for enough. So we don't ask for enough money to be taken seriously. So we have to have a bigger ask, like $50 million, and then we find ourselves, well, we're a really tiny company, 4.7 FTEs. So for us to ask for $50 million, we don't have the demonstrated capacity or track record to be able to manage $50 million. So what do? So, and there's really interesting things happening in Western Sydney at the moment, and government takes ages. That's where we've decided, my board and myself, we've decided that government and politics, they're just not actually a friend of the arts in New South Wales at the moment, at all. At all. And they don't care at all. They don't care about the priority areas at all. And they care about votes. And so that's really challenging for an organisation like us because we don't have the same level of resources as Australian Museum. Wish we did, to have a $600 million vision cut down to $50 million. You know, that's kind of amazing. But it's private. So we've asked the question now, well, okay, let's have a look at who's working in Western Sydney because there's a venue that's being put up in Western Sydney at the moment called the Western Sydney Performing Arts Centre. It's aligned with it's on the same side as the Rooty Hill RSL. They've claimed the name, Western Sydney Performing Arts Centre. Parramatta's got its own business going on, but it's getting totally caught in politics. And that building is going down and up at the same time. Right. And I mean, it's being built with gambling money, right? So but that happens anyway. There's another big development happening in Luddenham where the heart of the development is a cultural precinct, and they're actively talking to organisations about what their footprint might be that they need. So we ask when all the time, and now it's just about where and who with.
Yep.
And could I answer the when question? So I guess I would say whenever you think the government might possibly give you money is the right time to do it. We had Martin Roth, who was
called optimism?
Yeah, or opportunism. We had Martin Roth, who was the director of the V&A at the time, come to visit us at ACME when I was there, and he said to us that if you're a museum director in this world right now, if you don't have a bid for hundreds of millions of dollars worth of capital development with your government, you're insane. And that was a British view at the time, but he was building the V&A Dundee and he had a big project in Shenzhen, and that's all, it's that opportunistic idea of try to expand whenever you think it's possible to expand, because there's going to be long periods where that's impossible.
I've just been up at ArtState in Bathurst. I don't know if you know of the New South Wales Regional Conference, and there were two fantastic case studies which touch on what both of you have said, and it was actually harnessing not government opportunity but philanthropic opportunity and corporate partnerships. And one was Portland, which is a town halfway between Bathurst and Lithgow, an old cement town that became a ghost town when the cement factory closed up. And a company bought the cement works, and the local art community have been working with them in turning that into a cultural precinct. The other one was an example in Bathurst, and it's the old sawmill, Trimane's Mill, and a crazy engineer who just loves the arts is turning it into a cultural enterprise rather than a cultural precinct. And so it will be a mix of accommodation and, really avant-garde, very old word, sorry, style immersive art practice. So 2 really exciting examples which are just totally community and finding the opportunity within their community. So it can be done outside of government, which sort of leads me to the question about consultants. Consultants are expensive when you're writing these plans, but if you need a bit of a foot up to get the language and to get it in place, sometimes you do need a consultant and you can take it then to government or to private world. So I suppose the question is, how do we ensure that consultants reflect and understand your expansion needs? And do they always get it right for the dollars? Does anyone have any comments on consultants?
Well, I've worked a lot with consultants on master planning, and at ACME, the government gave us money to write the business case. So we went to, and some of you may have dealt with them, but there are specialist companies around Australia that specifically write business cases so that governments will consider them. So they construct the cost-benefit ratio for you, and they create all the language around it. And that's a skill unto itself, and that costs hundreds of thousands of dollars. And some of them are big names like Deloitte, and then other ones are smaller specialist firms. And then there are people that are more linked to the museum and gallery world that provide master planning consulting. I think it's very difficult. I don't know how you would feel about yours, but it would be very difficult for us to write a proper master plan without somebody else coming in to help. Because somebody needs to come in from a museum design perspective and be the bridge between what you want to do and what your architects want to do. Because what the architects want to do doesn't actually have anything to do with your visitors. It has to do with what they think is beautiful. There's an amazing documentary that you can Google. It's on the CBC and the Canadian Broadcasting Company about the Royal Ontario Museum, the ROMS development with Daniel Libeskind. And their huge development took 10 years to do, and it was double and a half in cost. And it's called The Museum, and if anybody's interested in this, I strongly recommend watching it on YouTube or CBC website, because it's everything, every nightmare you can possibly imagine about how a museum project or a big gallery project can go wrong and what happens. So getting good consultants in and getting tightness around your project is pretty important.
Yeah, great, thank you. Karen, did you want to, what was your advice or experience?
I agree with Russell. I think getting consultants in to bridge that gap between what the architects want and what's actually required. We didn't actually go down that path enough. And we've found that there was things, especially from storage perspective, things that just aren't really something that you would put in a museum, which ties up a little bit of space and eats away at prime retail when you're storing your collection. So definitely bridging that gap would, from a consultant's perspective, would help. We, at the time, I guess not realising, just utilised the skills and experience of the Albury City staff and the cultural services staff at Albury City, which they were quite well versed and should have enough understanding and knowledge, but because they're not there on the ground watching things being built, it's it's hard to catch those things.
Yeah.
So
sounds like any building project, really. It's just the dollar figures are a lot more. Rosie, how about you? Are you sort of pro or anti consultants? Do you think they are a necessary evil in building a great museum or a great cultural institution?
Look, I do have quite a strong view on consultants, actually, and again, it just comes from Western Sydney. Sorry, but that's my stomping ground. But in that particular stomping ground, there's money for consultants to write things, and then there's not the money that follows through to deliver. So it's just really I've just really clocked that actually in the last 12 months. It's $100,000 here or $100,000 there that goes to a consultant, and sometimes one example I can think of right now is for the same project, 2 different consultants got 100 grand each to do the same thing, and I was called for the same focus group session, both of them, and gave the same information. So that's pretty dispiriting.
Yeah, definitely.
When you're trying to wrangle, kind of any sort of investment in an arts and cultural program outside of bricks and mortar, when consultants are writing things that may or may not go anywhere, because generally the consultants are writing stuff for government. And then we come back full circle to, well, we know that that's just going to be like that or like that. So,
Hence why your very small piece of paper with lots of big comments is so important. It's where your voice falls into it. Russell, you had an incredibly successful campaign and build with Auckland Museum, I understand. 70 million project. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that and how that sort of differed from the kind of scale that you're working with the Australian Museum?
Well, what I'll tell you is that it's still nowhere near being done.
Oh, right. Oh, really?
And I left there in 2012.
Oh.
So successful might be a little bit, putting a little bit of polish on there.
I totally misread that.
Auckland Museum had a lot of money in their asset reserve, and it's probably worth mentioning for those of you who are familiar with big organizations that it's for many decades it was the responsibility of an organization to hoard its asset reserve so that when something happened and you needed money to fix your building or to do something big, you had some money. And in the last decade or so, at least in New South Wales, and I think this is being replicated in other parts of this region, governments have actively worked to try to get organizations to shrink their asset reserve down to nothing, basically live on their asset reserve. It's like if you need to live on your own body fat or something like that until you're emaciated. So the New South Wales government introduced an efficiency dividend for a lot of institutions, at least our size, and that was specifically about get your asset reserve down and live off that until you don't have any, and then we'll take care of you. So we've gotten to the point at Australian Museum where we have none left, and now we have to ask the government to take care of us, and they're like, what? At Auckland Museum, they had $70 million of asset reserve that had to get spent before the government would do something about it. But it's taken 7 or 8 years to figure out exactly what to do with it. But I think they're on the move now. They're doing well.
They're on the move now,
yeah.
Right. Okay, but scale is an interesting conversation. And I think we have 3 very different levels of scale here. And I suppose regardless of scale in many ways, while we can have great vision, great planning, to actually translate that vision into cold hard cash and actually breaking ground is, I think, probably the hardest point in the entire project. And I remember talking to Simon Mordaunt and he said one of the hardest thing for him was actually losing the couple of stones of weight he and his wife had put on when they were doing the MCA because of all the sort of schmoozing and talking and, selling of the project. And it's an endless chain of selling. And how do you keep that vision and the spirit alive? Because it's selling it that makes it happen.
Yeah, you just do.
Burnout.
I mean, that's the job.
That's the job.
The reality is that's the job. And if you love the job and you love the organisation or the company that you're working for, then actually it's really easy because you believe in the company's work. So for me, in Urban Theatre Projects, I think we should be getting heaps of money because I absolutely believe in the work that we do. We've got a festival on in Blacktown at the moment that is brand new work. Every single project in the festival is brand spanking new. We haven't bought one thing in from anywhere else.
That's phenomenal.
And so that level of investment, that level of care and attention to bring those works in, I go, okay, well, yeah, sure, I'll shop that idea around. Or For 3 years ago, we were doing something because there was not any great opportunities for First Nations artists in Western Sydney to write. So we started a really small program. No one would give us money. It was called B-Side. I'd asked everyone, no one would give us money. And so, okay, well, we'll just do it then. So now we've supported 16 First Nations artists to write something, but out of that came something which we're all really proud of, which is called Black Box. And that no one would give us money for that. A philanthropist said, if you can confirm an architect and raise the whole amount to build, I'll give you $5,000. And I went, okay, all right, cool. Well, we'll just work with that then, because that's what you've got to do. So we've got an absolutely amazing architect, Kevin O'Brien. He's an Aboriginal man living in Brisbane. The whole of Black Box is First Nations led. Daniel Browning's our curator. Andrea James is our producer. Lily Shearer is our community cultural liaison. And all of the artists' work presented in that box, which is a surround sound pavilion. So we've got a bit of infrastructure. We're in the game. We've got a bit of skin in the game. We have built. We have project managed. We've worked with architects, but that was it. And so now now we have our own space. We have our own space, and the space we decided to have first was a First Nations space. And so the company lets that go, and that's led, and my team work out what we have to do to follow. That was if we didn't have the $5,000, it was enough, because we're thoroughbreds in the West. Pascal knows that. We have big hearts. Yeah. And we do things for a very, particular reason. And I was talking to someone today, actually, Sue Goldfish, and I was in a journo, and if you want to affect change and you really believe in the work that you do, which I think we all do, right? You build something and you want something really fantastic to go in it. And if you don't have a building, then you work out how to go out of a building and still do something really incredible that is about affecting change. So we can all go be politicians, but that shows the worst of us. Or we can go make really fabulous art and, show the best of us, really. So that's when you say, how do you keep doing it? You keep doing it for that. Can I tell one more anecdote? Because this is really... So one of the venues we're working at the moment is a Chinese restaurant. It was thought to be the very first retail shop in Blacktown. Anyway, it's no longer operating as a restaurant. And we've got a bunch of volunteers who live locally who are working with us. And I was sitting in the back kitchen on Friday night just chatting with one of the volleys, and we were talking about where we were both from. And he mentioned to me that he was from Syria, came here a couple of years ago, da-da-da-da-da. And I'm loving it. He's got a big, cool Right Here, Right Now t-shirt on. He's probably almost pushing 60, but he's totally loving the work. And anyway, after about 40 minutes, he leaned into me and he said, "Can I tell you something?" And I said, "Sure, what is it?" And he said, "This project's the first time I've talked English to an Aussie."
Wow. Love it.
What keeps me going? Right? That. So will I go and try and get a building for the company? Absolutely, I will try and get a building for the company, because he will come to the building and he will keep working with us.
I'd give her money, would you?
So I don't put on weight. I'm not like Simon. Do I talk to people? I'm fucking talking. Is this streaming? Great. I am fucking talking to everyone about what we want to do. And I wear shoe leather out, because I know the work that we do is really important. And I know it is the future, and that is the Australia we want. We want it. We want it, right? Don't we? Yeah, I just seeing if you were listening.
So my next question to you was, what do you think bigger organisations can learn from you? And I think you've kindly, you've pretty much covered it in the sense that building culture is also about building cultural capacity, not just building bricks and mortar. And I think that, perhaps that sort of diversified operating model actually can be a really great precursor to getting these other, kind of infrastructure projects up. So, maybe when we were talking about timing before, maybe we need to think of alternate ways to build capacity first before we sort of tackle the big bricks and mortar and the big ask. staying with you just a little bit longer, Rosie, what's the challenge that you've found in really getting that traction and that visibility in a bigger picture, getting people to listen? You've spoken very much about talking, but how about listening? And, how necessary is it to get those ears to actually take something to the next stage?
Yeah, I mean, look, it's really necessary. I don't know, I feel like I've kind of just said it all.
Yeah, is it
really.
getting more competitive?
Look, I don't think so. I think competition is really good because what we all do is all really different, So I don't think we should ever worry about competition because that means more of us are out there talking about what we're doing, which means that it's important and it's urgent. Mm-hmm. So I think that's good. But it's just it's a tipping point, and I think for us small organisations, you've got to it's just getting over the line, and that's where the hard or heavy or whatever it is lifting that you've got to do, because you just simply don't have the resources that a big organisation do. So I have an excellent board and I bring them along to meetings with me all the time just to try and fake that we're bigger than we are. But, a lot of it is about, demonstrating capacity, and I've been told repeatedly by the state government, the thing that's frustrating about my job at the moment is that it's one rule for the city and it's one rule for the West. Mm. And until that changes, it's going to be really hard for anything to shift in Western Sydney. So I was told that if something I'd proposed to the state government, they said, if you could spread that across Western Sydney, Rosie, we'd give you the money. It's like, oh, okay, really? Yeah, because it'll look like we're just giving money to the one area, which they're doing that anyway. They're giving a lot of money to Parramatta, and I said to them, well, actually, that's really interesting. I said, if we were in the city, I don't know if you would ask me to do the same thing. I don't know if you would ask me, can you spread that across all of Sydney CBD? You're asking me to spread this project across Western Sydney, which is many more LGAs than Sydney CBD. Mm. So there's at lots of different levels, the narrative has to change around the West, and government just has to catch up. Really, and also get out of the way and stop trying to curate stuff in Western Sydney too. So there's a bunch of sites out there and the government wants to do lots of things with them, which means nothing happens then.
Yeah, wow, really valid comments. Working with governments and councils, we've sort of been bouncing around that topic a bit. Any quick tips on how you navigate that turgid water? Okay, dead silence.
Well, there's probably not really any tips apart from, just make sure that you gather all the information and facts before you submit anything. Ask lots of questions. The council officers are generally there and government officers are generally there to answer any questions that you have and that you might need clarification, because sometimes if you gain their perspective and get their buy-in for it, it can just help sometimes get things over the line and help get them to come in and see your point of view and help. They will help with as much as they can. They don't want to hinder a lot of things, so they'll identify.
One of the tricky things with government is that and local councils, they're constantly merging and changing at their footprints, and that I'm sure a lot of us feel that our project that is about a community is actually being hijacked for other agendas. It's a very tricky thing to sort of keep that in perspective when you actually are pitching to these guys. So I don't know how we work better as a sector in keeping ourselves and our visions on track and that integrity. Well, we are incredibly have strong integrity as a sector. I wanted to ask next a little bit about cultural tourism and how much is that used as a tool for you at all levels in terms of actually escalating your organisations and escalating that idea of building culture. Is it a real thing?
Well, it is for us in the sense that I don't like to use the phrase cultural tourism, but I'll use it for the sake of answering the question, is so underdeveloped in New South Wales and in the city of Sydney. And there's such a thirst for it amongst at least international visitors, but I think in really everyone. And the offer that needs to be made by New South Wales as a state and Greater Sydney as a city is something that has to be deliverable to the casual visitor that comes on a cruise ship or flies in, and for the communities that that spread out around the whole city. And those are two different sets of delivery mechanisms for culture. And given where we are geographically, we are pretty focused on trying to answer the need for cultural tourism for people that aren't familiar with Australian culture or New South Wales culture, and really the New South Wales cultural story is so underdeveloped. I mean, it's just not being told as well as it could. And we've got Sydney Living Museums, and we've got the Art Gallery, and we've got Powerhouse, and we've got us that are capable of doing so much. And there's years of work that needs to be done to galvanize that all together and make it into something that's really compelling for people to come and spend more time in Sydney and New South Wales, and then go and explore the other parts of Sydney and the other parts of New South Wales at all, because so many international visitors just disappear up into Queensland or Northern Territory for some sort of cultural experience, but they're missing so much of what actually is here because we can't deliver it really well right now.
And how about you, Karen? Did you find that your development and amplifying what you did actually made you a destination?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So
absolutely.
Affected numbers?
The performance from an audience perspective is significantly higher than ever anticipated in the original business case and business plan. We have been recently working on with our visitor information centre and tourism centre on actually trying to work better with them to engage and to attract and draw audiences. But we tend to find that a lot of people were already making Albury a destination because of the name that Mama has actually generated nationally and internationally these days. Just the other week I was actually told that a lady had come from Sydney specifically to Albury to see the Immortality exhibition that we have on at the moment. And people just stop and come just purely and solely because of the quality exhibitions that we have on offer.
We totally love those stories. I just want to touch on one more thing before I open up to questions, and that's that thing we don't always talk about when we think of big building projects, and that's sustainability. Once the bricks and mortars happened and, a year's passed, maybe 2 years, 5 years down the track, how do you ensure that artists and audiences will continue to be activated through new programs and spaces? And how do you sort of, the problems of funding that expanded capacity with the new building? Things like paying the electricity bill, for example, operational costs. They're not always in that master plan, are they? So do you have any comments on sustainability as a panel?
Well, from Mama's perspective, ours is very much a progressive business model approach in which 27% of our budget is self-generated revenue. From a sustainability perspective, we do have a fantastic, one of the things is a fantastic retail store, but we also have a restaurant lease. We have a really great and engaged audience for our paid education sector as well. In addition to that, and sort of not from a financial perspective, to make sure that we still continue to get our audiences, it's building those relationships with our local community, but also our national and international community about the things that we have For our local community, for instance, we've recently changed the original business case and business model was that we actually offered spaces for hire, which is just, to exhibit things which just didn't quite sit very well. So we've recently changed that. Now we open and offer an open call for local and emerging artists. It doesn't just have to be local artists, but where we offer, a handful of artists each year to exhibit in our gallery spaces. They get paid at NAVA rates, and we build relationships with them and teach them, from a professional point of view. We mentor them through that process on how to develop and expand their arts career and become a professional artist. And there's some really significant things that come out of that, and engaging those artists, because their networks and their communities start to filter out and start to flow out as well. It's also from a networking perspective from, other cultural institutions, and getting to know other people and building relationships to fan out their networks and your networks to get and gather, top quality exhibitions. So,
how about you, Russell and Rosie? Any profound elevator pitch on sustainability?
Well, the government loves to fund big, shiny projects. And I don't know if I think there might be somebody from the gallery here, and I don't want to overgeneralize, but in general, so I am now going to generalize. Giving capital money for a big project is something that is that the governments feel they can do, and it adds to the luster of Sydney as a city and New South Wales as a state. But they don't tend to then give you operational money to run the fancy thing that you've gotten money to build, and it's always a struggle. And so the sustainability of a building project, or the sustainability of a big project, is kind of entirely predicated on actually being able to run the space later on. And if you have to go back and beg your government for money to run the space, and it looks like you've made a loss somehow, or you haven't delivered properly, or something like that, it's a bad position to be in. Mm-hmm. This is the most difficult part, actually. I'm not trying to undersell this, but it doesn't seem like it's that difficult to get money for the big, shiny project, but it's really difficult to get money to run the thing later on. And this is we're in this quandary, and I think a lot of other people are in this quandary as well. Walsh Bay, all the big things, and there are lots of big. The War Memorial project that you mentioned is federal funding, but these are huge amounts of money, almost inconceivable amounts of money. But someone's got to keep running the building afterwards, and that's scary.
The reason the War Memorial is interesting is because other cultural organisations in Canberra have had to go through really rigorous efficiency cuts with staff and programming. While another cultural organisation is getting a wallop of money to build. So it's kind of a very, very thorny topic. And on that happy note, I think I might throw it over to questions. Who wants to lead the way?
We don't have a mic tonight.
Okay.
So just
be bold.
Put your hand up and we'll pass it around the room for questions. So anyone with a question?
Anyone with a question? Yes.
Go for it.
Karen, I've got a question for you. How much do you think that the rebranding of the Albury Art Gallery into Mama has been part of the success of the equation?
I think it significantly drove, that audience understanding of what to expect when they came to the museum. When we first rolled out that brand, it was Mama is bold, Mama is brave. It was Mama is all these big, amazing things. We've muted that down a little bit now and turning it into, we're actually showing you now what we are, not telling you what we are. And it's a lot more palatable for people to come in and actually experience a lovely quality thing. But answering that question, changing that name and actually getting an understanding of what and having purpose behind it actually does make a difference to audience.
Was there much pushback from the locals about the new name?
Just trying to think. I think there was a little bit actually, because people were so used to ARAG, Albury Regional Art Gallery, which, like, why, you know...
Such a good ring.
They weren't quite... they weren't quite prepared to depart with something that had been around for so long. But once people actually understood the purpose behind the name change to Murray Art Museum, Albury, they actually did get on board and they did buy in, especially the ones who were part of the drive to get it up and running and part of the process behind it. Albury is one of those funny little, well, it's not actually little, it's probably not too dissimilar to a lot of regional centres around, in that a lot of the cultural understanding in the region isn't quite at that level that you would hope, that you get a lot of local walk-ins and things like that. We're still working on that local understanding of what Mama is. And I was talking to a lady on the airplane on the way up here today who's from Beechworth. She's lived around Beechworth and that all her life and has never stepped foot into the art museum. And I'm like, okay, well, we've got Sydney Nolan, you live in Beechworth, that's related to, Ned Kelly, you might actually come in now. So, you just got to find those connections sometimes to get people in the door once they're in the door.
Yeah, Jasmine.
I've actually got another question for you, Karen. When you were describing the development and consultation process, which, if I recall, began in 2001, how did your vision that you would have an international audience as well as a national audience and a local audience, and also the desire that you would work with artists who had an international profile, when did that come about and how did it come about?
That probably came about as part of, in 2014 there was another sort of cultural master plan and cultural precinct master plan, and when the business plan was being developed for the museum, they visited a lot of the other regional centres and a lot of national recognised centres as well, and put together their concepts and their ideas about what would work best for Albury and why Albury would work well as a national and internationally recognised art museum. One being the location in between Sydney and Albury. It serves a really good purpose for people who are travelling internationally, who are travelling from Melbourne through to Sydney, can stop in and see the museum. And from a nationally perspective, we wanted to have our region recognised. We wanted to be a cultural destination and a cultural hotspot for Australia. Did that answer all your questions? Sorry.
There wasn't any resistance from your council or your community or region
In making it
in having a vision which, from what I gather you're saying and what I know of your institution, that there's this continual interchange between the local and the national and the international. I've worked in local government myself, and at times I have encountered resistance to that.
I think the actual local sector for Albury City are basically a forward progressive moving centre, and they want to grow and they want to develop and they want to be known as, I guess, as one of the spots to go to outside of the major cities. There was, when I think back about some pushback from locals, from the international and what comes in from an international or from a national perspective, that mainly comes back to people who are probably more used to the traditional type of art and not so much from a contemporary art space. But they're easily, we sit down and just have, like some of the ones that I'm talking about, some of our volunteers, we sit down and have a chat with them and just let them know that we're here to accommodate your needs as well. We do have to rotate shows so that we can get, a broader audience participation.
As the old saying goes, you bring them on the journey with you. It takes a while. None of these things happen overnight, but we're all in it for the long run.
Well, from 2001 till 2015, when it opened, is a long time and a long process, and through those time, council changes, and every time council changes over, and you think you're about to actually get some groundwork and some footing in the ground, they decide to change their tact and perspective and go, well, we don't want to do that, and hence why we had to go out and raise, try and raise 1.05 million, which we well and truly over succeeded in that. And
one quick question. You're about to, another sort of next phase of that, which taps totally into what you're asking, Jasmine, is you guys are about to embed an advisory committee for the gallery within council. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that? I don't fully understand it myself, but it sounds like an interesting way to sort of help path that next.
So we're currently undertaking a governance structure review and how the museum will be governed moving forward. We currently have an advisory committee that's it was originally set up with the advisory committee being there to provide advice and assistance and be a skill-based committee to assist the museum with developments and where we were to head. It doesn't actually work in the way that we want to from a arm's length perspective in trying to actually gather philanthropy money and income from people. They still see that they're donating to council, and there's a whole lot of misconceptions and sort of preconceived ideas as to where the money is actually going. It's not as transparent as it could be. So we are currently reviewing that structure. We have just appointed our new advisory committee because the term of that was for 2 years, and we had to extend for another year, and now we've got another 2 years to develop and undertake the governance review. We actually put this new committee in place based on a skills base. So each person on that committee has now got specific skills that are required for where we're heading on our journey now moving forward. And so there's a number of options for us moving forward, which could be a Section 355 committee, which in essence is an independent business, but it's still a government. It still actually is a government and local government entity, but then an actual independent board structure as well, where staff and all that will still be employed by Albury City, but the actual governing and the running of the museum is actually undertaken by that governing board structure. So it'll be interesting to see where and how it moves through over the next 2 years with the advisory committee.
Governance boards, they're such important things, they're just like eating chips without beer. It's a bit dry, but at the same time, it's just so important to getting you on the right path.
Well, we had such an exciting and a really heartfelt driven philanthropy drive to begin with, that once the new structure once Mama actually came in place, there was a little bit of a pullback from people because they weren't sure how their funds were being treated, and so it's been really hard to get out there and drive and get additional money coming in to actually sustain and be sustainable because of that governance structure.
Just a note to everyone, Create New South Wales only launched, when was it, Friday, a thing called I can't remember the name, it's Creative Financial Toolkit, but yeah. And it basically helps you, arms you with strategies for approaching corporates and philanthropic, the whole realm of giving. Don't talk to us too big. Yes. Yes, yeah. So anyhow, that is up online for small to mediums. Yes, Ivana.
I have a question for Rosie, and I think we would all agree that we all adore the work that early therapists do. Yeah. And it's almost a little insulting to ask you, or you have been asked by various parties to do a lot more than is realistic for you to do. Would you consider partnering with anyone? I mean, is that kind of no-go territory at all, or is a partnership something that you might consider to kind of help but a good partnership that you really believed in?
Yeah, well, no, I mean, we partner all the time. So we partner with Blacktown Arts. We've been partnering with them for, I think, around 12 years now. So that's a really robust partnership and a lot of trust. When I didn't answer the sustainability question, but a couple of years ago I just thought, right, if I'm going to ask for money, I may as well ask for it for 3 years from people. So anyone who wants to get into bed with us at the moment, I ask that every time, and so far no one said no. So we're partnering with 10 Days on the Island for 4 years in Tasmania, so that's really good. Barangaroo Development Authority for 3 years. Who else? Yeah, so we definitely partner to deliver what we are doing, but and everyone lets us do it on our own terms as well, which is really good. But it's still but it's also it's really interesting, like us three being together, because, and Gina said just share things, so I'm just going to share things because, you know, this is why I'm in this job as well, because I learn heaps in it. But someone said the other day, oh, well, we'll donate $2,000 to you because we know you'll do a lot with it. But we wouldn't donate that to the Australian Museum because
Guys, don't take it up back.
yeah, you know, but it's just also a perception that at a company our size, $2,000 will change our life, which it just won't. Like, it's still not a lot of money. But in a bigger institution, $2,000 just gets sucked in. So again, looking, you know, it's about trying to shift that narrative as well with philanthropists to say, well, you could give us $50,000 and we would still do more with it than a major because we don't have the same overheads. But then it just kind of comes back to capacity. So I spend a lot of my job just demonstrating that we deliver, actually, you know, and that we're not going to lose your money, basically.
Rosie, can you describe what the space is that you imagine for the company and what's happening there?
Thank you.
Yeah, well, I've had my eye on a space for about 4 years. So, you know, do you mean like physically?
Yeah, what's it look like, feel like, what's happening there?
Yeah, at the moment it's pink. It's pink, it's empty. It's about a 5-minute walk between 2 train stations. It's about a 5-minute walk from a high street. It's about a 5-minute walk from a public swimming pool. I've tracked down the owners. It's not for sale, but I have hope, City of Sydney, that you bought the post office for $5 million. Hoping this place has got asbestos. That, you know, because we won't knock it down. We'll keep it as is, and maybe it'll go for cheaper. But you know, it's a big factory. That has been empty for many, many years, and it's been in the same family for since the 80s. So that's the kind of thing that we're sort of, you know, looking for. And then whether it's for UTP or whether it's for UTP and all our friends, because that would be pretty exciting. But what I have learnt as well is that private money moves things very, very quickly, and the public money, you know, I don't know if it's a good use of my time anymore to spend quite as much time with politicians as I have in the last 18 months. It's definitely not a waste. It's absolutely good work, but it's always driven by a political agenda, and, you know, I've got to look after the art, really, so.
Wow, what a valid point.
Just to add, like, it reminds me a little bit of when Performance Space had to lose their space. Yeah. They weren't given carriageworks because they were too small. Yeah. And so this kind of larger infrastructure was brought into space, and it really disadvantaged them for so long. Yeah. And I feel like they're just kind of emerging, and they had to go through so much work about kind of creating work outside of the space because they couldn't afford it. So that, you know, they had to develop all these partnerships and all those kinds of things. It was kind of a really interesting process, and it feels like, yeah, there's lots to learn from that.
Hey, I just wanted to address this question some of these projects that we're talking about, cultural infrastructure projects, they often go on for quite a long time, from sort of the inception through to something actually being built. And especially when you're dealing with governments or institutions, whether they're funding you or supporting you, those sort of government or institutions, they tend to have quite a high turnover of people and staff, a bit of a revolving door. I just wanted to hear your thoughts about how you maintain a consistency of intent through that whole process and not let the sort of that revolving door of public servants or politicians or whoever affect what the project becomes. It's something there's a lot of history of that, particularly in the city with the Opera House being a classic example way back when, but even on much smaller projects, definitely seen.
Maybe Russell, do you have
Well, this particular project is kind of the opposite of that, because we have to have the building ready at the end of 2020 for the Tutankhamun exhibition to come. So our panic is on the front end because the government is not as fast as we need to be right now. So getting MOUs signed and contracts with architects and things like that done, so I mean, that upfront stuff, which when you're incented to get something done really quickly, you can smash that through pretty quick, but governments aren't incented to move quickly on things like that. They have built-in bureaucracies that kind of work against that sometimes. So sometimes it's the government processes that can extend a project for a really long time. Sometimes it's the institution doesn't have its act together and doesn't really know what it wants to be when it grows up, and so it needs that time to kind of develop it, and that's where master plans have to be really flexible.
Yeah.
And that's unfortunate. It's better to come in with a really tight vision and just execute on it, knowing that all your external things like your governments and your funders and stuff are gonna mitigate against you getting it done. So the tighter the project that you have, the better chance you have it getting done in your lifetime. That's what I would say.
Adelaide Contemporary is quite an apt example in the sense that, it was a dream developed by Nick Mitsevich, who's now with the National Gallery of Australia. Went through an international architecture competition, had a lot of funding promised, not delivered by government, and then both he moved and the state government changed. And so speaking with the current director, Anna Davenport, recently, she is 100% sure the project is going ahead, the government is committing to it, but it will be a very different building. When I say building, they want to keep the plan. They think the plan is absolutely beautiful, but what is inside that, bricks and mortar, will be massaged and changed for moving forward. So it's a tricky one.
I guess this is where the frustration with consultants comes in, because the direction changes, and then you have to get people back in to go, well, what is the new direction? And you end up spending the project's budget.
I think a lot of those
changing direction.
A lot of those big projects. So when you're talking about multi-million-dollar projects, there is a bit of buy-in by both government parties. You can't not have that when you're going to that kind of the table and taking taxpayers' money. So, there is that sort of understanding should the chairs shuffle, which they do all the time. So behind you, I don't know your name.
We've talked a bit about the journey to get a project off the ground and a little bit about what you do once it's up and running and the sustainability of that. I'm interested if any of you have any talk about your experience during the actual construction of a project, whether it's an expansion or a renovation or a new build. It's going to have an impact on your staff, your programming and your budgets. So I just want to reflect on how you might have managed or journeyed through that a little bit.
Mama, the Albury Regional Art Gallery at the time was completely non-operational because we decided to build on a brownfield site and not a greenfield site. So we actually had to take a lot of our collection and put it in storage at the Albury City Council Chambers building, actually, of all places. Security was upped immensely, and a lot of the gallery at the time was actually fairly scarcely resourced, and when the Library Museum was developed in 2007, there was some major, some structural changes within the Cultural Services Department that shifted a few staff to different places, and we had sort of fairly thin staffing structures at the gallery. So those staff that were in place still went over to the council and actually went through the collection and catalogued the collection and did a lot of groundwork behind that without, you know, I know it would have been nice to be able to still put on exhibitions and things like that, but you just can't do that when you don't actually have the space for that. We, you know, if at all we did need to do something, we might have had things within the library museum space. I do know at one point we had the Archibald exhibition during that redevelopment, which we had at the library museum. So it was, that's sort of how we did that during the construction
National Portrait Gallery is about to close for 6 months because its rectification of the building is so severe that they can't operate during that rectification. And I'm like sitting here going, tick, 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 watching the clock at the back. We are at time, so we are, aren't we? Yeah, we are.
Is there
any burning questions before? Yes.
Just one. I just want to just throw out there. I'm Lisa Connick from the City of Sydney, and as I mentioned, we're involved in our culture and infrastructure strategy. And some of the things that have been coming up in our consultations around this has actually been the role of cultural organisations as property developers themselves. So it's actually thinking, you know, absolutely to your point, Rosie, which is, you know, government is fickle, difficult, time-wasting on so many levels. And I'm speaking as a council employee, but, you know, like particularly I think from state and federal government, you know, we just see such a turnover. We're very, very lucky in the City of Sydney to have had a longevity in terms of our leadership, which makes an enormous difference. I mean, the purchase of that property has got a 15-year history to it in terms of our engagement with the Aboriginal community and kind of the time was right, you know, but it's taken a really long time to get to that place, but then we can make a decision really, really quickly, okay, because of that absolute certainty that there would be a back-in from the politicians about it, but that takes a lot of time to get to. But that's why I think about something like your pink building. You know, the question I would ask you is, if you do know who owns it, why won't they sell it? If they won't sell it, because there's also a whole lot of tax issues around that, which is one of the other things that we're looking at is some of the tax incentives around why these buildings are sitting. There's a lot of properties owned by a particular part of the Sydney community who are just sitting on it, and they won't sell or they won't do anything because there's a big tax write-off for doing that. Okay, so we need to look at some of the ways in which we can influence that. So in that case, it's like what kind of deal could be done, you know, to, you know, with that, or with a property developer, you know, owning the asset yourself, you know, gives you a whole different level of capability and capacity in terms of the kind of a business that you can operate from there. So I guess I'd posit that out there. I think we have far too high a reliance on our government investment in, particularly in this kind of property market. You know, I've been in Toronto recently, looked at the model there, you know, a company called Artscape, who basically is a kind of an arts property developer, you know, company. There are a lot of examples around the world which we're looking at as well, which, you know, I just want to have that conversation here. You know, I know we've got very different circumstances here, but thinking from that point of view of how can we actually put the resources into particularly the small to medium sector where, as you said, trying to actually get projects that, you know, then the scale's not big enough to attract, you know, the big ticket announceable. So what can we do about that? So I just wanted to posit that there and kind of go, this is a conversation we really want to have with the creative community and just sort of, you know, pivot ourselves a little bit and think differently about, you know, what can we do around both operating models, not just the bricks and mortar, but what we put in those, how do we build that? You've already done that with the projects from the ground up. You've got that, but you don't have the bricks and mortar.
Thank you. Really great comment. Yeah. Please join me in thanking Rosie, Karen,
and thank you also to Gina. Round of applause for Gina. I hope you found that panel as interesting as I did. Thank you.
you so much for your insights into how we build culture. It's been really fantastic tonight. We do this once a month. SAMAG presents these seminars once a month throughout the year. And we have our final seminar on the 3rd of December, just 4 weeks from now for the year. And that seminar is on cultural leadership with a focus on women in leadership. And actually I think we've had 3 fantastic female identifying leaders on the stage here tonight. So if you'd like to join us for our end of year gala seminar, keep your eyes peeled for our announcement that's coming out shortly. Thank you all again for coming tonight, and we hope to see you again soon.